yeah, today is a bizarre day for both
So
of
I
us.
know. Oh, well, I'm excited today. This was a very challenging, topic for me because I am not a gamer.
I am so excited. Like, I am so nerdy right now. I have my video game t-shirt on. Like, look, I'm like full nerd right now. Look at this. It's like Mountain Dew and Doritos all over. And those people. I'm like wearing a diaper like an astronaut. Like, I'm sorry, I'm in for 8 hours. Not leaving. Oh
Yeah.
my, so you know, so Lydia, you remember I was telling you about how Lydia met she was at the hotel bar and met the stripper.
Yeah.
This stripper has a podcast.
Oh, really?
So I'm like, she should be on the show.
Did
Let's
did
go.
Lydia do her due diligence and was she like, oh, well, my husband has a podcast and it has
She's
24 subscribers.
I
You should
am
really check it out.
yeah. I checked out the person's podcast and they have more than 24. So they're gonna be our competition now. I
We
don't
have,
know if we can compete with that, but
we have a little ways to go, I guess. Well, slow and steady.
that, that's right. That is correct. I don't even know what other podcasts are out there. I don't listen to them. I'm the worst.
I don't I don't want to admit I don't listen to, but I don't think that anyone else actually wore funeral clothes last week to mourn
No,
the death of poetry. So
no, they're not really putting their full hearts in.
no, I
They
mean we
are putting
really
they
go
are
up.
putting their
Uh,
CVs front and center.
yeah,
So they're
yeah.
not us. We are sabotaging every opportunity we can possibly get. So we are Table for Deuce. Welcome everybody. We are the show where we shoot the shit about all things lit. And that includes video game literature, as we'll delve into later today, which I'm so excited about. But with me, as always, is Kate Hanson Foster, author of Midriff, author of Crow Funeral, and all around fantastic person. I am not going to roast. I'm going to toast Kate today for
It's
just
crazy.
being so. Kate has like blah, blah, blah. Kate has done so much behind the scenes as far as editing the videos and making so much of our rambles into these nice little compact funny things, or more compact than they are. Usually they're just these sprawling like tentacled beasts,
Yeah.
but Kate is able to take that and make it a cohesive, funny thing. So many of you probably don't know that, but there are fun hours spent on the back end that Kate handles. So Kate has been fantastic. So welcome everybody, Kate Hanson Foster.
Thanks, Michael. I think
Yay!
that what people don't realize is that like whenever like a meme or a graphic comes up on the screen, it's because I've sliced my sentences apart so much, trying to cut out all of my likes and stupid ideas. And I'm like, if they saw the version of me without the graphic in front of me, it would be like robot. Thank you for that compliment. That was very nice, but it's very fun. It's a labor of love. So I will read, in the spirit of internet and pop culture and gaming and all things current, I thought I would have a little fun with an AI generator and found one that generates
Ooh.
bios. So I plugged in just a few facts about you, and I'd like to read what the artificial intelligence robot came up for you. So Michael Schmeltzer, who hails from Japan but now lives in Seattle, is a poet of 2 books of poetry. Not bad so far.
So far, so good.
Schmeltzer has been published in many magazines, including Hokey Pokey Poetry, and has been anthologized in the Sin Eater's Manual. I don't even know what that means. One time he got kicked off an AWP panel for weaponizing kindness.
It knows everything about me.
Well, I put in a few facts, but like short facts, just that's not entirely true, but whatever. If AI says it must be. So and when Schmeltzer is not writing, he can be found eating McDonald's and playing video games.
That is 90% true. It's scary. Yeah. And little known fact, everybody, I was kicked off an AWP panel and I made that shit implode and they canceled the whole panel because I wouldn't leave. So fuck you people. That's what I say to those hosts of that panel. Oh god, you pissed me off. I did. I went. I was like, I was ready to fight. I'm gonna fight people at this Seattle's AWP too. I'm ready. I'm just gonna get kicked out of that too.
I mean, my track record so far this fall is not so great when it comes to including picking up my child from the nurse's office today. But I'm like, if all goes well, we will be at AWP together.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy.
We're gonna have to do some kind of. We're gonna have to live stream and just roam and ask questions and just roast people to their face.
I did that last year and it wasn't even for a podcast. I just logged up.
What was the Jericho Brown quote about you?
Oh, that was at AWP. He was reading.
Oh, okay.
Guest reader at Exeter, and afterwards there were like after drinks and stuff at the hotel lobby where he was sitting and stuff. And anyways, I just thought I was making my normal chit chat as I often try to do with celebrity poets, and he just stopped and looked at me and was like, "You are a very strange woman, Kate." Well, my friend Matt, who invited me, is in the corner like, why do I invite her every time? Like, why? Why do I invite her?
Yeah.
She does stupid things every single time.
I wanted to mention because recent, and we mean this sincerely, a recent basically poetry legend has passed away. Charles Simic, Pulitzer Prize winner, Pulitzer Prize finalist, I think numerous times over, has basically won every possible award I think there was, including translation prizes. Just a giant in the literary world, has passed away recently. So just if you don't know Charles Simic's work, I can't say I know a ton of it. I have read The World Doesn't End, which was his Pulitzer winning book. And I've read some poems here and there throughout the years, but always someone that I've respected as far as their intellect and their talent and humor and just surreal minimalist poems at times. So just wanted to have a quick moment. And if you are a fan of Simic, please link us some poems. We would love to just check them out and post about it and things like that. So do you ever wonder how, like Charles Simic, for instance, obviously smart, obviously just this life of literature and reviews and translations. And I just think, is he, when he was speaking off the cuff, was he anywhere like this? Or is anyone else like this? Does anyone else babble, or is everyone smart and it's just us? Like, I don't understand. I feel sometimes
like their babble. I think it's kind of like I've embraced my babble. I think I don't know. My favorite poets, have a sense of humor. So because I think humor and poetry are more intertwined than we realize, and it's about both attempt to delight and surprise the reader or the listener, and whether it's by laughing or by the impact of poetry and all that. And so I don't know, I've just seen in my experience the poems that I like the best, when I do meet the poet, they have a really great sense of humor. And so I'd like to think that he did too. And I've never met him, but I've read a lot of anecdotes, and he seems like he was a really great guy and fun to be around. So yeah.
Indeed. Yes. I hope that is true. I hope people have great memories of Simic, and toast to you, Charles Simic, wherever you are. Thank you for your legacy of poetry and just advocacy for words.
Now on to video
And,
game poetry, guys.
on to video game. Let's talk about what matters here. Let's go. Are you ready to talk
I am.
video games and poetry?
Absolutely.
Let's do this. So I thought of this poem. We were talking last week about the poem, and it referenced Romeo and Juliet, the movie version with Leo and Claire Danes, and it got me thinking about more pop culture things. And I'm a huge gamer, and I've work kind of tangentially, whatever that word is. I work in the video game industry and kind of a different slant way, but I do. So I love games. I've been gaming since a kid. It's really interesting. So now I've like doubled down in my nerdiness when it comes to games. So now I'm like even more invested because I'm like, oh, now this is like paying me a little bit. So here we go. That's that. But so video games, I've been a huge fan for a long time. So Cartridge Lit is an online literary journal that actually focuses on video games as literature, and they accept fiction, nonfiction, and poetry inspired by video games. So I wanted to check out a writer who is working in that realm and talk about how pop culture and things that we might not think of as literary can actually be something that inspires us, in the sense that maybe it's more like an ekphrastic poem than it is just some weird niche little thing. So the poem that we're gonna toast or roast today is A Manual for All of Your Collisions by Jamison Crabtree. A manual for all of your collisions. Nearly everything is replaceable early on, when the world is large and you are small, but still, you will lose everyone you love. One by one, each will leave you. The world will shrink. Little things, old books, tea sets, trash bags, bigger. Your gardener may fly off, up into the sky, or tremble violently across the horizon. Your family will make its own unique silence and topple through the ground. Sad as they are, these things are, and they are bound to happen. Fate or whatever will leave no trace. But you can imagine them back into your sleep early some nights. Besides, there are more gardeners, if that's what you're looking for. And a family is something you construct. It changes size capriciously. Look, the shoreline's awash in new dogs and trash. Things vanish. People vanish. It's okay. Please stop avoiding loss. Rush into it, because, and please remember, all at once and eventually, you will leave them too. This is all living is. Why should you ever have expected anything larger? That was A Manual for All of Your Collisions by Jamison Crabtree up at cartridgelit.com. And one thing I will mention right off the bat is the fact that it is essentially all lowercase. It seems to have a certain kind of grammatical world of its own in a lot of ways. There are some fragments, but it's still using, apostrophes and periods and question marks. It very much looks almost, I don't want to say they're going to come out wrong, and I know how it's going to sound. It almost looks amateur in a sense, where it's like very much looks like what I've seen a lot of teens kind of write in my day. But I think there's just some really fascinating things happening, and I think it's one of the rare poems that usually I balk at all lowercase letters in this kind of style where it's broken up and fragmented. But for me, this particular poem, it works in conjunction with kind of the subject or this idea of loss that is happening throughout the poem. I think there is I want to say it gives me One Art by Elizabeth Bishop vibes a little bit.
I was going to reference that. It totally was. It reminded me of that for sure. Yep.
Right? Yeah. So I like that, and I'm assuming if we both kind of picked up on that, there must be a hint of that in here. I don't like to bring in bio too much, but Jamison Crabtree, it says, is a Black Mountain Institute PhD fellow. So I assume they are extremely intelligent. I'm pretty sure they've read One Art by Elizabeth Bishop at some point in their career. So I love that kind of slant reference to all of that, or their own take on that. And like I said, I can't specifically say what game this is referencing in any way, shape, or form, or if it's just this generic kind of idea of a game and this manual that you can sometimes get with video games so you know how to play. At least that's the way they did it back in the day. But yeah, from the title, I just found it very, very interesting and very fascinating what they were doing in this kind of tone that they've achieved by the small letters, the small lines, these short little fragments. I don't know, it sets this kind of really interesting mood for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it's funny that you brought up One Art because I picked that up immediately, almost so much that I was surprised that it didn't. I don't think it's obviously not like plagiarized or anything like that, but it's so this idea of embracing loss so directly, and and what was the line towards the end? Like rush into it, it's very similar to the way Elizabeth Bishop is, just kind of like, throw it all away and embrace disaster, and that kind of thing. But all that aside, I feel like I should begin by saying I know very, very, very little about video games. Like Pac-Man gives me anxiety. Like the last game I ever really played in earnest was probably Zelda. So it's not something I really do or get into. So first off, all right, so I'm not a gamer. Okay, so if you put this in front of me without the context of knowing it's published in a gaming venue, I wouldn't pick up any gaming references whatsoever. But because I had that context, I did a little bit of trying to read it in that way. I did come across something because I was like, is a manual for all your collisions a game? Like so I was like looking around to see if I could find like the video game that it was referencing, to see if like gardeners fly off into the sky, or I had no idea. So I Googled around a little, and I obviously didn't find anything. But I did find that there is like in the act of or in the practice of gaming physics, that there is something called collusion or collision detection, which is like, it's the way to program, I guess, to make sure it's like the algorithms for like space partitioning, so that when you have like your characters, they don't like go through each other, like if you're moving around, that there's enough space, and there's like a whole collision detection algorithm to make sure that things work in that way. And so I got curious if it had anything to do with that, but that was the only thing I could really think of, if that was like gaming language. Other than that, I was having a really hard time to see exactly how this poem really relates to gaming at all. And I like that, and I don't like that. Partly because I think when you have a pop culture reference in a poem, it can be very accessible, I think, to a lot of readers, but it also can be like super alienating. So you have to really toe the line of using, kind of like in Caitlin Gildrian's poem last week, and she brought up the Romeo and Juliet, and we both said like we would always be scared to bring up like the Romeo and Juliet movie from like the 90s, because you run the risk of turning people off if they hadn't seen it, or like in this case, you might be turning somebody off if they hadn't played that video game, or if they don't play any video games, or hadn't heard of it, or whatever. So this particular instance, if somebody gave me this poem, I would read it completely outside of the context of video games. But one of the things that I related to, I could relate to right off the bat was everything is replaceable. And as a mother with young children, I have replaced so many things. TVs, an iPad, like other important things. And I don't think that my kids, and with the TVs, it was like a harmless thing, somebody was throwing something around and just that, like just got to hit the corner of a TV, like enough that it, ruined the whole screen. That happened like twice in 5 years.
Wow.
And as much as, we disciplined our children and, and they were also sad and remorseful, again, because, we like TV, we had a new TV like pretty fast after that. And so I think in their small minds, that turnaround time of replacing our things feels really fast, and then it kind of, the way the poem sort of goes on to kind of remind you that, you're not going to be around forever. No one's around forever. We're going to, you're going to start losing people one at a time. And so that's really relatable to me. I think it's something that we all come to terms with. And so I did like that part of the poem. In terms of the grammatical approach, again, like I always I try not to pay too much attention to those types of choices, but at the same time there's always like a little bird on my shoulder with like a beret on its head. That
That's a very specific image of this bird.
My poet bird on my shoulders asks why, like why this choice? Why did you make this choice, and what is it doing for you? Like, what does it do for this poem? And I'm not sure I know at all. I can't really say what I like, and I can say specifically what I don't like, which is the writing because as B/C, and that drove me crazy reading it. Not even just for like the way it looks, but which I'm assuming comes off a little bit like an algebraic, coding algorithm type deal or something. Which could be semi-intentional in that way, but also I'm not a fan of ampersands in poems either. I just don't like it. It's distracting. I don't, unless I can find the distinct purpose and really come down on what it is or why that choice was made. To me, it's nothing special. It's not doing much for the poem.
I love ampersands, but you have to let me know that you know what you're doing with them. If they're used willy-nilly just because, like, I like to think of them as like a knot in a way, because it very much looks like you're tying something together. So if the two words like on each side of the ampersand don't somehow tie really well together, for me it just feels like it feels decorative more than a really good choice. So I think in most of these they just seem somewhat decorative. And like you said, with the B/C as because, I'm not sure if there's more like kind of coding or algorithmic things that are happening that make it seem less poetic and more like computer lingo or game lingo or whatnot. But for me, I'm not really familiar with coding or any of that stuff, so I couldn't really tell you if that's some kind of little inside knowledge or joke within the poem. I want to touch a little bit about what you said about if you read this poem like outside of the magazine, if you would understand that it's a video game poem or not. And I definitely don't think I would pick up on that either as like a specific video game poem, let's say. So it reminds me of what some of the cooking show judges might say if they're like, oh, if you're going to say you have green tea and ginger cake, I need to be able to taste both. Like it might, like if you're like, oh, this is a great green tea flavor, it's a delicious cake. But since you said green tea and ginger, I need to pick up on the ginger, and then you get docked points type of situation where I'm like, should I feel like a little bit of me is like, would I dock points for this? Because if it was outside of this journal, I'd have no idea what they were talking about as far as in a video game context. So I'm
Right.
like, oh, but because it's in a video game magazine, does that make me think a little bit negatively towards like, even if it's a good poem or not, like if you're saying it's about or based off or inspired by video games, like how is it inspired by video games? And I don't necessarily see it being inspired by in this quite the same way as some of the other poems I've read in the journal itself.
Yeah, I poked around, to other poems in the journal just to kind of get a feel of what other kind of poems they
Mhm.
publish. I definitely found more concrete references to
Oh yeah.
specific games, and I'm not saying that's better or worse.
Mhm.
It's just one of those issues. Like, if you need context, that is tricky. And like for
Mhm.
this in this particular situation, the context of the video game realm helped justify issues, like I said, that with the grammar, or also the gardener flying away in the sky. I literally saw like this little like meep boop 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 boop, that's how I pictured it. And being like, this has to be some kind of, the way video game characters, you know, just live or in a universe that is unlike our own. But then at the
Mhm.
same time, it's tackling things that are very much within our own real world. And so, um, yeah, and so I was constantly going back and forth between the two, almost wishing this wasn't in a video game magazine, so that I wasn't always trying to struggle for that context. I think that, when you have these niche journals, I think it's great. I love journals that, especially editors, if they have a passion and they want to curate a
Mhm.
space for that passion and solicit um content that is very specific to that theme, and that's their thing. I think that's wonderful. I think it probably is great on their end in terms of really slicing and dicing that slush pile.
Mhm.
And they probably have a very smaller submission queue, and uh and so that can be easy and better to
Mhm.
slowly curate as an editor. But I also feel like it can come with some significant problems. And one of those problems is, is this poem, like, are you choosing poems that are great, or are you choosing
Mhm.
just the best of what you are receiving in your theme? This is kind of like a two-part problem, because I also think that if you have these niche journals, and people, I think, know that the submission queue is small, it can be easy to send your less than strong work and sort of repackage it very as vaguely as into their theme, um, just because
Mhm. Mhm.
you want to keep getting published.
It reminds me of like I'm into horror movies, but like there's essentially no one that I could even remotely think of that is writing, let's say, a horror poem without it just being kind of ridiculous. Like, I mean, there are these genres and these little interests, and not little interests, but these interests in different kind of like little subcategories of things that I think would be so interesting in a literary sphere, but writing about them is so difficult. And like you said, do you not necessarily lower your standards, but when your pool gets just that much smaller in the writing, like how do you still manage to curate or edit some of the best writing while also managing to keep that interest, whatever that original interest is, whether it's video games or horror movies or sci-fi and things like that. It's such a hard kind of combination of things to do, I think. And there's only a handful of poets that I could think of that manage to kind of combine different interests like that into some really, really like brilliant poetry. But it is difficult. And I think that's possibly one reason why I avoid a lot of pop culture references or various interests in my own writing is that it's really hard. And like you said, even with humor, like being funny in a poem is it's brutal. It's so difficult.
It really is.
So
We're talking about niche poetry, but this is like
mhm.
super niche. I mean, this
Oh,
is like ultra niche. And so I wanted to go and read their submission guidelines and see like what
yeah.
they're actually looking for, because like I said, I wasn't really sure if this particular poem fit the guidelines. And
Mhm.
anyway, I loved what they wrote, that they were looking for pieces that live within virtual worlds, what non-player characters dream of when the heroes aren't around, what happens after the world is saved, the unseen sentences hidden between the lines of code. And that to me is like, I mean, talk about like a writing prompt. I mean, that's fun. I don't even
Mhm.
like video games, and that is such a fun concept to think about, and like an awesome just launch pad into like
Mhm.
bigger ideas of thinking. So then I tried to read this poem in that, by those guideline standards, and to see if whether or not this poem kind of follows through on what they're looking for. Um, and I'm still not sure. And I think it's
Mhm.
you know, there's just some of the, not to get like too nitty-gritty into some of the lines, but like, the idea of like the small things and the big things, right? First, you're going to lose some of the small things. And and like, or yeah, like the old books, tea sets, trash bags, and then bigger colon, your gardener might fly off into the sky. I mean, and first of all, the small things doesn't have a colon in that way. But
Mhm.
it's like that's fine. But it's just like, wow, like we went from trash bags to the gardener flying off in the sky. And I'm like, first of all, I would love to have a gardener. I don't have one. I don't know, I know many people that do. And
Mhm.
second of all, I just it kind of goes from really small to really abstract, like to like not just big,
Mhm.
like you're not going to go from losing a tea set from when you're younger to losing maybe a parent, or and the idea of death and loss. It just leaps into this total abstract image of the gardener going off into the horizon, and then also like dogs and trash on the beach. I wasn't sure what that
Mhm.
meant exactly. Like, are the dogs washing up with the trash, or are the dogs eating the trash, and why are all the dogs there? I don't understand. Again, like the overall idea that we do have to come to terms with loss, and that's a very something that we all, I think about.
Mhm.
It may not be all the time, but and so sometimes reading a poem like this is one of those harsh reminders of things that we will eventually lose, or a reminder of things we may have already lost, and that it's inevitable, and that inevitability, it can be something that you need to kind of work into your regular existence, but and I do like the last line, why should you have expected anything larger? And that is,
Mhm.
a little bit of a anti-afterlife, anti-God, maybe anti-bigger universe, and bringing it back
Mhm.
down. So, I'm just reaching to create these little worlds, that like kind of like the microcosm of a video game, and how it all has its limits. You can win the
Mhm.
game, and you can play it again and again, but it's not going to change.
Yeah, it's interesting in that context. Like there's the limits of the world within a video game, let's say, and then our own limits here in what the real world or whatever you want to call this. Um, I think so. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of smallness and largeness, and like I said, the one thing that saves the poem as far as the lowercase letters. And I was looking through the other poems on the page too, and he does a lot of that. I mean, it's the same kind of stylistically, I would say, is pretty similar. But I do like that. I like it gives me like pixelated vibes. I guess it would be like the best way to phrase it. And I keep thinking about what is largeness, what is big, what is that concept, like what more is there according to the author, according to the speaker. Like I'm just very fascinated by it. There's a kind of real, I don't want, maybe like darkness or cynicism a little bit to some of this. Like it's just, there's this kind of like defeated, and I maybe I feel it a little bit like heading into my middle ages here. Is just like, yeah, like there was so much different sense of possibility and largeness to the world at times. And you get to a point, whether it's real life or in a video game, where it's like you complete something, or you feel like, okay, this is the limits of where I'm going, or this is the limits of my space. And I really enjoy the fact that, well, this will sound kind of odd, but there isn't references to, let's say, like the ocean or space or anything. These things that give me a sense of smallness, because in comparison to something large and immense like the ocean, when I see like the Pacific beach, when I go, it just seems overwhelmingly large, and it gives me this sense of the world is this giant magical place. Or if I look up at the sky in the middle of nowhere, it feels big. And this poem is like the reverse of that, where it's like shrinking down a lot of things. And even with the gardener flying off into the sky or tremble violently across the horizon, there is still that sense of like this quiet, small kind of compactness to so much of what's going on in the poem. It's a strangely claustrophobic kind of piece to me.
I think it gets a lot of things right about life. And I think, you know, in again, like in our own microcosms, things are pretty small. And yeah, you know, our families can remake themselves over and over again. That's a very real, true thing. And I really liked that. You know, I liked the line, "Your family will make its own unique silence." Um,
Mhm.
I wish, because I had this image of like coffins in the ground, and so
Mhm.
I was a little thrown off by the word choice of topple. You know, like they'll make their own unique silence and topple through the ground. I think I would have loved like burrow or something, like this idea of like coffins burrowing in the ground as opposed to topple. You know, falling over. You know, family making a silence by falling through the ground just didn't really work um as much for me. But I don't, you know, that's just
Mhm.
picky. But I did, you know, I love that, because, you know, it's like the poet says, you know, sad as they are, these things are, and they are bound to happen. And it's so, it is, it's very doomsday. And you know, I wanted, you know, and that's okay. You know, I
Mhm.
I don't think that that's bad. I guess I wanted more um justifications, because when you get to the end of this, like, stop avoiding loss, and you know, I don't know who the speaker is talking to, if it's himself, or
Mhm.
if it's someone else. I, you know, I don't know, it could be like an internal monologue thing happening. But you know, it was like rush into it, and then it was just rush into it, period, because
Mhm.
because we're Ampersand, please remember.
Mhm.
It was like, that's it, rush into it just because, like that, you know, like, you know, I was expecting more. I wanted to know like why, you know, because I think our instincts, or at least, you know, the way generally humans talk is like, you know, take in every day, you know, or like, you know, this idea of me talking about my kids and then breaking stuff. You know, how many times
Mhm.
as parents can we count that they, people say like enjoy them while they last, while they're young,
Yeah.
like soak up every second, not like rush
Mhm.
them into college, get them out of the house. Because
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like, not that, I mean, obviously, we both don't write the happiest poems a lot of times, I would say. But that question of what should the author leave a reader with is a really interesting one. And I think about this in film too. Like, do you want to sit through 2.5 hours of just someone going through misery and then just dying? Like, what's the point? What does that say about life, or what does that teach, or what kind of artistic value does that have? Um, and this kind of, I can see the criticism there with this one. Like you said, I do like that last line. Why should you ever have expected anything larger? And I'm trying to figure out if this is a pretty like nihilistic kind of defeated voice, or if this is a more sort of, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die type of poems. Because I kind of get both vibes depending on where I am in the poem. I kind of feel like there is this sense of strange optimism that can be found once all control is lost to a person, like that moment where life is so absurdly sad that you just start laughing. I feel like there's a lot of that kind of emotion in some of these lines, where it's just like things are like you're going to lose things, and when you were small, things were replaceable and they felt fine, and then it's not going to be like that. And I don't know where to put that feeling, I guess. And I think that's a good thing. I think poems that can kind of complicate your own emotions, generally, I see them as a favorable thing. But yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, complicating your emotions is definitely, I think, a good thing, because there's really uh, a back and forth between very tangible, emotional, real things that we go through, and then more abstract images, that create more of an alluring, mystery, I think, about life. The shoreline's awash in dogs and trash. Things
Mhm.
vanish, people vanish. And it's very abstract. I don't exactly know what it means. I don't know what it could be a larger metaphor for.
I can see that. So we were discussing with our only friend, Clint, earlier about how do you make a list of things into something more than just a list of things, basically, was the question we were kind of tackling. And I'm looking at like old books, tea sets, trash bags. That there's old books, sure, a little vague. Tea sets gives more of a sense of kind of time or kind of personhood, I guess. Trash bags is just trash bags. Do the items here really give a sense of enough of a sense of specificity to evoke some kind of emotion? And I don't know, that is a little bit, it keeps me a little bit wanting. I have to admit, I don't mind lists, I don't mind things, but I some of these things I just am not connected to enough to feel their loss anyways.
Yeah.
So, but I guess, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not sure, maybe that's the point, because they're small and it doesn't matter if you lose them, so who knows.
I kind of was expecting a little bit of a progression. It's nitpicky, but it helps. Like some of these little details, because this does feel like, it's describing a progression of one's life and the things that you lose
Hmm.
way, and how much you lose along the way, and how much bigger that loss becomes. I feel like fine tuning some of these little details, even because they are a little abstract, would make all the difference in sort of guiding
Hmm.
the reader throughout. Again, to go, back into the bigger things, it's a little cold, I guess, in the sense that, you're gonna lose these things. It's okay. Like I mean, he literally just it's okay, you know, like it is what it is kind of thing, and stop avoiding it, rush into it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I keep trying to squish it back into this packaged idea of video game, and it still keeps pointing to something larger, even though it's simultaneously saying, you know, why would you expect anything larger? But it, you know, it's, you know, I don't know, it's just it's it just keeps rubbing up against itself in a weird way.
Mhm.
You know, there's just a strange friction in the intention and and I think what we're receiving on our end.
I think you touched on that kind of coldness, which is a really, I think, accurate way to put some of these things. I mean, the part, sad as they are, these things are, and they are bound to happen, is very pretty casual about some of these things. And not that it needs to be overly sentimental or overly emotional or whatnot, but yeah, there is a very kind of casual approach to some of this, and that can be found in like Fate or whatever will leave no trace. So I think, like I said, I can't tell if this is a deeply cynical kind of voice or if it's strangely like voice that has just accepted things and is ready to just move on with life despite knowing that it's just going to end and they'll eventually leave too. So yeah, I'm like right in the middle.
Yeah, we can go for it if you want to.
Yeah, should we try? Let's do this. Wow, this is a tough one. I am. Ooh, yeah, I suppose. Okay, since I picked it, I will do the voting first. I like you said, I like the title. I don't necessarily read this as a manual per se, but the title is still interesting. They managed to do a lot of craft things that I tend to steer away from really well. I thought the intentional use of all lowercase, kind of the intentional fragments, the intentional um, kind of the way they broke the lines were really interesting to me. I think they did a lot of things that were so well done and obviously well thought out. So this person is fantastic at craft, I think. And I looked at some of the other poems and I have no doubt they absolutely know what they're doing. I think this poem has a lot of things that are enjoyable. I think a lot of lines stick out for me. There is just a little bit of connective tissue within the poem that doesn't quite cohere for me, even though like so many pieces I could say I like, but then taken as a whole, it doesn't quite move in the same way that I want it to or connect in the same way I would like to see. Um, yeah, so I think despite all that, and then I've been thinking about this as more of an ekphrastic poem based on inspired by video games or based on a specific one, and I don't necessarily think it needs to be very um specific or very direct about what it's connecting to, but I can't necessarily find it connecting to even just in general a video game world or ideas too much anyways, other than like the gardener flying off or that kind of reverse gravity moment that can happen. So I think for me, despite so many things I actually do enjoy, I'm gonna be a little more critical on this end and roast it.
Well,
Yeah, but I mean, like, so, and I should preface too, like, I think this and read in conjunction with the rest of the poet's work and as this whole, like, I really enjoy what they're doing. I think it's unique. I think it's different. I think they're obviously talented. And just because I roast this one particular thing doesn't mean I won't be exploring a lot of their other work. Like, it makes me think and it's very interesting. And what did they say? They have a book of laments for movie monsters. So obviously this is kind of their realm.
yeah.
Like they're this extremely smart, talented individual who really loves to explore these different sides of culture and making them work in the literary sphere. And I think that's, to find someone that can do that well is so rare. So I'll definitely be exploring more of Jamison Crabtree's work. So I will say I will toast Jamison Crabtree, the writer. I will roast this particular poem, but Jamison, I will be exploring your work because I think what you tried and attempted here is extremely, extremely good and admirable. And some of these other lines and these other poems are so great too. So I mean, you have a fan, but in lieu of, you know, of just always being toasting everything, I had to go with the roast. So there I am.
Oh man. Well, that's I think a fair assessment and justification of your verdict. I agree though. There's a lot to be admired in this poem. I think, you know, when you tackle or if you're trying to write towards a niche or a very specific theme, that poses a lot of challenges. And you know, even as you were talking, I started to think a little bit more about, you know, because like I said, my experience with video games is very analog and, you know, two-dimensional and all that. But, you know, that there is, you know, video games today. I've been watching my son play, I think it's Madden or something. Is that the football game?
Yeah.
Some of these things are so realistic. They look like real players. It looks like real life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put it in that way, a lot of the things that we were talking about, you know, where it's sort of it kind of just does this balancing act between real life, you know, reality that we have to deal with every day, and some of these more abstract images that I think, you know, even though he's playing a very realistic video game, it also, I'm sure, has its abstract moments that are just very specific to the game and not at all possible in real life. And, you know, as he's playing it, those, you know, that game has its limits, and why would he expect anything more once, you know, once you turn the TV off and put the game console away and all that kind of thing. That said, I context is everything, you know, and because it's in this journal and because I had to read it through that lens, it became a distraction and a inner conflict in my head that I think took away from the poem, than if I were to read this without context at all. On the other side of it, if I read this poem just handed to me with no context, I would be wondering about some of these images that are just a little strange, and don't make so much sense, like the gardener flying off, you know, into the horizon. And I don't want to say, you know, that I think, you know, I don't want to put down niche journals, and I don't want to dissuade anyone from thinking of creating one or anyone from submitting to them. I guess this to me is an example of where the content is just too ambiguous to justify its place in this journal. And I think it was probably good enough because it is interesting. It does have some really interesting lines, and it lures you in with the strangeness of it all and the strange grammar and all that. But it raises more questions than answers, than gives answers. And at the end of the day, you know, the art of losing, I learned about a long time ago when I read Elizabeth Bishop's One Art, and I think she did it better. So I am going to have to also roast this poem.
Yeah. So the interesting like dilemma of these kind of journals is, like, for one, I do want to also say, like, these kind of journals are fantastic, and I think they do as much for the literary culture as your Paris reviews, or I mean, they might not have the same reach, but I think creating that kind of diversity of subject matter and being able to explore pop culture or different arenas or different audiences even is so important. Like, if you are a journal that only caters to MFA havers, That's boring. Let's be honest. It's not good. It just creates a system of like elitism and gatekeeping, and that's kind of crappy. But when you have journals like this, where people who probably aren't interested in poetry will actually look at it or might find something that they can relate to in a more concrete way. I mean, some of these other poems are very direct in how they're connected to Zelda or Final Fantasy or all these different kind of games. So when you can reach that community or reach any kind of different community, I always think that's a good thing. So encourage people to go check out this journal, Cartridge Lit. I encourage people to check out Jamison Crabtree's work, because they're obviously working in those kind of realms too, which I think is very important. And like I said, obviously PhD. I mean, that is just so smart. I'm pretty sure he's just so talented.
There's no doubt that we're the dummies in this conversation.
Exactly.
100% kudos to Cartridge Lit. Reading the guidelines and the possibilities, I was intrigued to, as a writing prompt, to find sort of language within the code and how you can play with that and work with that. Is such a fascinating idea, like very super cool. And so I think that what they're doing is awesome. There is challenges when you do have such a specific niche to make sure that your content is always excellent, and you might have to make some concessions to either publish less frequently until you get the best of best of what you get, of submissions, or you have to concede that maybe the work is good but possibly not great, and that is, that's a tough challenge, I think, for an editor of this type of journal.
Yeah, and that, like we were saying, like it to not necessarily, I don't mean like cater to one audience, but I mean, when you definitely write or edit for one audience, how do you expand it beyond that audience, especially when, like you said, it's such a small category of people. There are a ton of gamers out in the world, but gamers who are also into poetry, that's gotta be a tiny fraction of us. So
but I do want to talk, if it's all right, to transition to next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I kind of want to keep riding this pop culture wave a little bit since we're on it, and so I had actually put a call out on my Facebook page because I have a personal list of poems that reference pop culture, but I was really curious what people might suggest, and I got a lot of suggestions. But there was one that I was reminded of, and I would really like to talk about it. It's in the waiting room of the Dell Children's Hospital CF clinic at age 40, and it's by a poet named Bree A. Rolfe, and it's from her book that was published, I think it was I want to say 2021, so I think it's still pretty new, and it's her book called Who is Going to Love the Dying Girl, and it's originally published in the Coachella Review, so I'll put a link to it for you and for everybody else. But I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but it's a very interesting poem, and I think it'll be a shift for us and kind of talk about pop culture in a different way.
Interesting. All right. Don't think I know the poet or this poem, so yeah, I'm excited.
I have her book, so I would love to do another giveaway with her book, because I do have a couple copies, and so we can work that in, talk about that next week.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us once again at the table. We are our Table for Deuce. If you want to email us your opinions, you can contact us at tableForDeuce@gmail.com, 4 as in the number, tableForDeuce@gmail.com. Watch our video, like, listen, subscribe.
Get us to 25. We got to get to 25.
We got 24 right now, and that's uncomfy. We want to go to 25. That is so much better of a number. We're a quarter of the way to 100. We can do it, everybody. Yep. Let's go. People are hungry for this kind of dialogue. I'm sure of it. Let's going from.
I'm trying to fix my ring light because I'm so sick of seeing the ring in my glasses. I'm sorry. It's just like.
You're getting a lot of chest and torso there, Kate. a little too crazy.
Yes.
This is the little podcast that could, or something. I don't know.